Welcome back to Up. I'm David Gura. On a 4-day state visit to Japan, President Trump is thousands of miles away from chaos in the capital and a lot of news across the country. A federal judge in Mississippi issuing a preliminary injunction last night, blocking that state's anti-abortion law from going into effect. The law, he writes, quote, threatens immediate harm to women's rights, especially considering most women do not seek abortion services until after 6 weeks. Well, it's likely Mississippi will appeal, and this will go next to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit in New Orleans. Meanwhile, on the immigration front, another federal judge issuing another preliminary injunction, this one blocking the president's plans to build sections of a border wall with money the president tried to get by declaring a national emergency. The gang back with me here in New York, Congressman John Yarmuth, still with us from Kentucky as well. Mike, let me start with you and have you just react to this, what we've seen in terms of pushback from the third branch of government. What do you make of the news that we saw over the last 24 hours?
It seems that the president has an agenda, but he's happy enough to just subvert his agenda in favor of the chaos. I mean, he's losing and he's lost left and right, and it doesn't seem like he could achieve or is achieving much. And I don't think he cares. Other than, I think if there is an eye on the prize, I can't see what it is other than self-enrichment. I can't see what I'm not even talking about legislation that I might want. I'm talking about legislation or a change in America that he might want. I don't see him doing anything, and I don't see him caring about it. I see him liking the fight and thinking it serves him. When you ask why, maybe all he cares about is a lot of ego and something that redounds to, his or his family's pocketbooks.
Congressman, you're in the center of this constitutional crisis. What do you make of what you're seeing from the judicial branch? I imagine you're investing a lot of hope in what's happening there.
Well, I mean, that's our last hope right now. And what's going to be interesting to see is, assuming that these decisions that basically are upholding the separation of powers in the Constitution, which is very comforting and reassuring. But what's really worrying me is what happens when these lower court decisions are affirmed, and then the administration goes ahead and continues its position. For instance, they refuse to comply with subpoenas or production of witnesses. That's where we get a real constitutional crisis, and I don't know what happens. But meanwhile, I'm very, very reassured to a certain extent that the courts keep reaffirming the separation of powers doctrine, because that, as we've said, the Article 1 created the Congress as a co-equal branch of government and gave every bit of legislative power to the Congress. And that's what the big fight over is now with regard to borders, with regard to a lot of foreign policy, the Yemen resolution, for instance. So, again, things are positive from the judiciary right now. I hope it stays that way.
Sophia Nelson, you share that positivity? I mean, last week we were talking about Congressman Justin Amash, who was making a constitutional argument here for going ahead with impeachment proceedings. Yes, he's a libertarian, but that was for a long time very central to the Republican Party. This reverence for, this belief in the separation of powers that is instilled in the Constitution.
Well, you know I love the Constitution, the separation of powers, and I agree with Congressman Amash. I think that to the Congressman's point, however, it goes back to our last segment, which is, are we going to allow the executive, Article 2, to continue to trounce on Article 1 powers? The Congress and the courts are going to be the arbiter, which is the way the founders saw it working out. But I think the real issue is President Trump reminds me of Pigpen. You remember Pigpen from Charlie Brown?
Yeah.
Everything around him is chaos, and you're exactly right about it. And if you can keep the chaos going and you can keep the attention on the wrong things, then nobody's talking about the right things. For example, the Saudi Arabia deal this week, where he sent arms, or he bypassed the Congress, and there was bipartisan concern about this, but again, people are passive. It's like they don't know what to do, so they do nothing, and he continues to plow ahead. Folks in America, I've said it 100 times, I'll say it again, wake up. This is not normal. This is not okay. This is not how America works. The Congress has an obligation. Congressman, I'm with you. Stand up, keep fighting. Let's get this man out of there.
But are the Democrats Charlie Brown with the football then?
I'm hoping not, but yeah, maybe a little bit. With Nancy's Lucy holding the
there you go,
taking the ball
pulling that ball.
Bit,
Robbie
right?
Mook, you've got Pigpen, all the detritus of democracy falling apart surrounding him, and yet to play out the metaphor, I mean, his buddies still surround him. He's part of the gang, and help us understand that in light of what we've seen this week. You've got Democrats who are not roundly criticizing him. I mean, there should be Republicans saying, going forward to 2020, we shouldn't be putting videos up the likes of which we saw on Twitter. There should be more condemnation than there is, and yet he's still welcomed in or embraced by the fold.
Well, and Lindsey Graham, I feel, is the perfect example of this, of someone who was so critical of him.
We got the whole gang, the whole Peanuts gang.
Yeah, exactly. Right there you go. So critical of him because it was the right thing to do, and he was saying the right things, and then all of a sudden his own political future becomes entangled with Donald Trump. If for him to pull away from Trump is for him to lose his seat in the Senate, all of a sudden you see this change. And to me, that just is the pure fact here. I mean, you look at Justin Amash, he comes out and says, you know, we need to move forward with these proceedings. Boom, literally overnight, he has a primary opponent. And I would argue he might have a pretty serious primary for saying something like that. And at the end of the day, that's up to Republican primary voters. So, you know, if I'd say anything for Justin Amash, if you're a Republican who doesn't normally participate in primaries, show up in that primary. You know, for Republicans that are bothered about what's going on and wish they were holding Trump more accountable, they're the ones who drive these primaries. They need to show up and make their voice heard too.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me, or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.